Welcome back to our breaking verdict coverage in the Delphi murders case. There you see the door to the courthouse, which is open on this Veterans Day for just one case, the Delphi murders trial. The jury has reached a verdict. Barbara McDonald from Court TV is inside the courtroom waiting for that verdict to be read. Once it's read, she'll come out of that door. She'll come to our cameras and our microphones, and she will deliver the verdict for us. In the meantime, if you take a look at the scene, they need to tilt that camera down just a little bit for us. If you look at the scene at the courthouse, this is bizarre. Like, courthouses are public property, ladies and gentlemen, just so you know. Courthouses are public property, but for some reason in Indiana, get off my lawn seems to be the order of the day. Everyone has to stay on the sidewalk. I don't know why, but that's just the rules. I guess they're keeping law and order in this small town of Delphi, where it took them 5 years to solve a case where the man they arrested 2 days after the murders told investigators he was there. And they did no further investigation of him, amazingly, until like 7 years later. Welcome back. I'm Vinnie Politan with our special coverage today. With me here on the big desk to help deliver this verdict is Court TV's Ted Rollins as well. Ted, what do you think first of the scene at the courthouse today? Like, I get it, you don't want cameras, but like no one on the lawn, wait till we tell you to line up. There's like, it just looks like it's a bit too much in a public trial in a public courthouse.
Yeah, we've seen this play out, both you and I. Depends on where you are. I think the smaller town, the more ripe you are for this sort of, you do this, you do that. But hey, let's face it, they haven't dealt with it a lot, and this is just their way of keeping everything in order and in control in an uncontrollable scenario that they didn't see coming. And to this community, it has been a horrible roller coaster. 8 years. And you think back when this first broke, the entire country was glued to it, and it was, I remember thinking, it's going to be a matter of days. Then they're going to have somebody. I mean, there's no way they're not going to solve this, a double murder of these two little girls. And then it took 5 years, and there was nothing. And, oh, there were things, but not Richard Allen. There were different people.
Oh, different people, yeah.
Different suspects. And so I guess Delphi gets a little bit of a pass if they're overreacting on the courthouse. I don't know.
I get that, except I look at the way this whole thing has transpired, right? And
yes,
this is obviously the highest profile case, but there's a madman loose in this small town, right? Takes two innocent young girls. Everyone's got to be terrified. 2 days after, the person they say, no doubt, is the killer, tells investigators he's there. Tells them he's there. There's a report written on this, and they don't even talk to him, interview him, or do any follow-up for 5 years until a clerk is scanning some of the papers and takes a look at it and says, oh, maybe I should show this to the detectives. A middle-aged man who said he was there that day. Like, how long was the list? The list had to be tiny, and he put himself on the list, but they completely ignored it.
So you have to believe that they've had some soul searching, you know, that this was a bungled investigation, and they know it. And now they're having to, first of all, they had to get him to confess to get to this point in this trial where now we think he's guilty. You take the confessions out of this?
No, I think there's still enough without the confessions.
The bullet?
Well, no, but you've got, he puts himself there. This is what I'll do. This is what I'll do. Gray Hughes, explain to Ted from your perspective, your theory on how you could convict Richard Allen without the confessions, but with his statements saying and putting himself at the scene.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, whenever I tell this story on my show using the map, I always forget about the bullet. And I don't even mention the confessions at all. Because the thing is Richard Allen said he got there from 1:30 to 3:30. He lied when he said it was 12 to 1:30 because those same three girls were on the trails during that time, and they didn't see him. They only saw him when they were leaving, and they have a photograph at 1:26 as they're leaving. Richard Allen's vehicle drives by the Hoosier Harvest Store, or a vehicle that matches his, parks the car, and then he says he got to the trail at 1:30. He passes the three girls, They see him, and he sees them. So that right there, he's locked in as that guy. And that guy, they all said, looked like the same person in Libby's video. Then it takes 11 minutes to walk to the bridge. And that would put him at the bridge at about 1:45-ish, because he passed the girls at like 1:34. So he'd be at 1:45, and then Betsy Blair drives her vehicle and parks at the parking spot and goes onto the trail immediately. And Richard Allen would have had no time to have ran past Betsy Blair, because she went right to the bridge, and guess what? She sees Richard Allen, or bridge guy, whatever you want to call him, standing on platform 1, exactly where Richard Allen said he was standing, wearing exactly the same clothing that the bridge guy was wearing. He said he was wearing blue jeans, a blue or black Carhartt jacket, with a hoodie and some sort of head covering, maybe like a skull cap, okay? And then Betsy Blair turns around after seeing Richard Allen standing there, walks back down the trail and passes Abby and Libby, and Abby and Libby, therefore, are going to run into Richard Allen right there. Then you see the video at the end of the bridge where it shows a person wearing exactly the same clothing that Richard Allen said he was wearing. There is no reasonable explanation at all that there was another person on a Monday afternoon at 1:30, a day that he happened to have off, and nobody else, like that's a work day. And there's this guy wearing exactly the same clothing that he said he was wearing. And when he was shown a picture, by the way, of Bridge Guy, they asked him, "Is this you?" And he goes, "Well, it's not me. If the girl took that picture, it's not me," which really means that looks exactly like me. And if a different camera took that picture, I would say, yes, that's me. I mean, this is like, to me, this is the most simple. And right at that point, it's already, Richard Allen is the guy that said down the hill and took them down the hill. And that makes him at least responsible for kidnapping and taking them to the crime scene. And then, oh, by the way, the bullet that he said he ejected in one of his confessions at the end of the bridge, they find sitting at the crime scene, and it linked to his gun with ejection marks. All right? And he's confessed. I mean, like, it's just, he confessed in a rational way.
Well, let's do this. Let's do this. I want to leave the confessions off the table. So let's go around the horn. Philip Dubé, could this case be made without the confessions?
Never. In fact, I'm not even sure that a grand jury would have indicted. It's only enough to prove presence. That's it. It does not prove commission of the homicides. If they would have had, for example, some forensics of the girl's blood on his Carhartt jacket or his skull cap, or they found his DNA under one of the girl's fingernails, or found a hair follicle of his on one of the girls, then he's finished, obviously, because it was direct contact. But the mere presence of a dry, spent shell casing is not enough to even file, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. And if I were a surrogate deputized DA for the day, I would reject the case, and I would tell detectives to go out, beat the bushes, and get me more evidence.
That's never happening. You will never be a prosecutor. Marie Pereira, could this case be made without the confessions?
No, I agree with Philip 100%. It couldn't be made. And I disagree with Gray that the confession is cut and dry. He confessed to a lot of things. And let's talk about the feces. Come on. This is a person who confessed. He said he molested them. There was sexual assault. There was not. He said he assaulted his daughter. That didn't happen. The man was not well. So this is a case that relies heavily on a confession that is suspect, because the confession is basically full of feces. It doesn't matter about the confession right now. And this is what the case is grounded in. The testimony of those eyewitnesses 5 years later, there's room for reasonable doubt there too. The length of time it took them to investigate really denigrates that eyewitness testimony from the people who said, just you, Gray, saying the timing and everything, how it happened was confusing to me. So to the jurors, I'm sure.
Well, this is what we're going to do. I understand it's a little confusing. I'm going to put together, we have a little map that we'll show you after the break, Marie, and we'll kind of flush it out a little bit. Ted Rowlands, your thoughts. Could this case be made now, do you think, without the confessions? If the jury takes the confession and says, listen, I'm not comfortable with them, they're all after he's arrested for the murders. Yeah. Are you comfortable?
No, I don't think they come back with a guilty verdict with just his presence being there.
And the shell casing.
Well, the bullet.
Yeah, the whole thing, the shell casing, the bullet, all together with the marks.
It's a much different case. Absolutely. If you're actually saying, Gray, that this is just a strong case without the confessions, well, then why did they ship him to Guantanamo Bay and turn him in and make him confess, basically, is what happened. Why would he go and be put in solitary confinement in a prison unless they were after exactly what they got, and that is a confession, turns out multiple.
All right, I can't leave it hanging there. Gray, you want to respond?
Yeah. So I guess psychosis makes somebody psychic. You know, I didn't realize that when you have psychosis that you can actually see into the mind of the actual killer and see this white van driving on a private drive that nobody on the planet knew about other than Richard Allen and perhaps the guy driving the van, okay? So I didn't know that existed. And by the way, I believe Richard Allen was completely, he was eating, he was exercising, etc. Then he confessed to his wife, and he begged them to believe him. And then the attorneys got involved. And don't you think it's interesting that some of the, quote, false confessions involve family members that they knew would come back and say, no, he didn't do that. Plus, they're biased towards him. So obviously, if his attorneys got involved for future confessions, you want to muck up the original ones that were completely said under no duress whatsoever. He said them, and then later on, these false confessions come out, and he started getting really crazy. I mean, literally almost the next day after he confessed, they're like, whoa, man. And he started drooling on his shirt. All these things were going on. It seemed to me completely fabricated.
All right, our guests are staying with us. Ted is staying with me. He's not allowed to leave. You're in lockdown, Ted Rollins. We'll be with you, folks, until the verdict is rendered and delivered publicly. You're watching special breaking coverage of the Delphi murders trial verdict.
Everybody says I went to the wrong crowd, but I think I was the wrong crowd.
Nobody in this world loves you like your parents.
And he said to me, you know, wouldn't it be cool if I killed my parents and had a party?
It's gonna get out of my head. I couldn't stop.
Which do you think you are? Sick and treatable or irredeemably mad?
Interview with a Killer. Season finale, Sunday, 8/7 Central. And don't miss the new season coming in 2025, only on Court TV.
Guys down the hill. That was the video for years. That was the big clue. The alleged Delphi killer. Prosecutors arrested a man named Richard Allen. They say he's the bridge guy, he's the killer. And now the jury has reached a verdict. Welcome back to our rolling, breaking coverage of the Delphi murders trial. You're looking at the live scene in Delphi right now. Folks lined up on the sidewalk. I don't think they're permitted to come onto the courthouse property. I don't know why. I thought it was a public courthouse, but that's another story for another time. Barbara McDonald from Court TV is inside the courtroom right now. She will be there, and once that verdict is reached, once everyone assembles, Abby and Libby's families, they bring the accused, Richard Allen, in, the attorneys, the judge, and then the jury. They deliver the verdict, and then whatever happens afterwards, as they sort of close out the day's business in the courtroom, then everyone inside has been instructed to orderly walk out of the courthouse, not run like a bunch of lunatics like they did in the Martha Stewart case years ago, when we had a similar scene where there were no cameras permitted in the courtroom and everyone in the nation wanted to know the verdict. This is going to be a little bit more orderly. There's less people in the courtroom, but Barbara McDonald from Court TV is one of them. She will come up and she will deliver to us what the verdict is. He's facing 4 counts of murder for the murders of Abby Williams and Liberty German, 2 counts on each of the young girls. It's been a long road, folks. It's been a super, super long road to get to this point where the jury will speak. If you're the victim's family, you're looking for justice. You want to turn the page. You will never forget your little girl. You will never forget your little girl's best friend. The community will never forget them. But they want justice. They want some sense of someone has been held responsible, the person who slashed their throats and took their lives. Families believe Richard Allen is the man. On the other side, Richard Allen has claimed his innocence. They've pointed the finger at specific people who they were not permitted to point at during the course of the trial. That's another story for another day. But as we wait for this moment to arrive, the big question is, will this jury come back and say guilty and deliver for the families of Abby and Libby the sense of justice they have waited way too long for? Now, as we wait for this verdict, I am not alone. I will introduce who is with us. Ted Rollins is, of course, seated next to me here at Court TV. Court TV anchor Ted Rollins. We also, Barbara McDonald is heading out of the courthouse, so we are going nowhere. We will wait for her to come and deliver this verdict. You can see people moving quickly out of the courthouse. Ted, this is the moment. I mean, we'll know in literally seconds, I believe. I'm looking at her camera getting set in place. Again, 4 counts. The verdict has been reached. The verdict has been delivered. And now the only thing left is, what is that verdict? So we saw Barbara walking out of the courthouse, and our camera is scanning to try to find her. Now, I know she's a pool reporter, so she has obligations to deliver that verdict publicly to other members of the media, and I'm not sure if she...
That's a good point.
That's probably where she had to go. When you're a pool reporter, you have obligations.
You have to go to the bank of microphones because you're literally providing the information for all of the networks now. It's a little frustrating that...
a little frustrating. We've got our microphone ready to go, too.
Yeah.
There it is.
But one would assume that we're going to find out very soon here. This is a unique way for us to get this information. Let's see if we can...
There's Bob Mata. I see Bob Mata.
Yeah. What if we can open up...
Yeah, why don't somebody grab Bob Mata and get him over here? Bob, can you hear me? He can't hear me. And you're seeing everyone's being very orderly, very under control. So you're not reading anyone. I mean, they were told to act in a very orderly fashion. If you're just joining us, the verdict has been reached. The verdict has been delivered. We are just waiting to deliver it to you, ladies and gentlemen. And maybe we could tell our camera guy just to grab Bob Motta right now. He's gone. All right, we'll wait for Barbara to come over. Barbara McDonald was, again, what's termed a pool reporter, meaning she has responsibilities to the entire media to deliver that verdict, and then she will walk promptly over to us.
Okay, there's Alex Perez with ABC.
And I was trying to see if any family members had come out of that front door, and I did not see any. Did you, Ted? I mean, it happened very quickly.
I did not. If our camera guy can hear us, the guy right in front of him right now is Alex Perez with ABC. He was just told what the verdict was. I saw him typing it away.
If you're just joining us, ladies and gentlemen, we are seconds away from finding out the verdict in the Delphi murders case, waiting for our producer, Barbara McDonald, who may be answering some questions right now. Here she is. She's here. You'll watch TV. This is live television. You got to zoom in. We focus. We'll get her microphone on, and she will deliver this verdict at this moment. She's got to put in her earpiece. She likely does not even realize that she is on the air right now. She's dialing in. I'm giving you behind the scenes stuff, folks. She's dialing in so she can hear me as we get ready for this verdict to be delivered. The question is, did this jury find Richard Allen responsible for the absolutely brutal murders of these two young girls, best friends who were there for one another at the moment some monster decided to take their lives? Unconscionable. Unconscionable. All right, I think we're just about ready. I can see Barbara putting on the microphone. And there you see Richard Allen. Those are not live pictures, I don't believe, or are they? Are those live pictures? Those are not live pictures we're looking at. So let's keep it live so we can see what's happening. So the folks at home, we can take them behind the curtain. We can take them behind the curtain today. And there's Barbara McDonald. I don't know if Barbara, can you hear me? She's not hearing me yet. Barbara, can you hear me? Okay. She can't hear. Okay. If we can maybe just tell the cameraman to turn on the microphone and just let her speak. Even if she can't hear me, I don't know if she's having a problem. Look it up. Here we go. All right, folks, get ready. We're about to deliver you the verdict in the Delphi murders case. Barbara McDonald, Court TV senior producer, on the ground, was inside for everything. Barbara, we've been waiting for this moment. Please deliver the verdict.
Guilty on all 4 counts, unanimous by this jury. The defense did ask to have the jury polled. They all affirmed that that was, in fact, their verdict. Guilty of 4 counts of murder, 2 counts of felony murder against Abigail Williams and Liberty German, 2 counts of intentional murder against Abby and Libby. Sentencing will happen on the 20th of December. The judge is setting aside all day. I can tell you when we got into the courtroom about 10 minutes till 2, it was somber. Very quiet. Nobody was talking. The room was filled with members of law enforcement, Indiana State Police, the Carroll County Sheriff's Department. Abby and Libby's families were already inside the courtroom when the media was allowed in, and the Allen family was not present. The media members came in, took their seats. There were 14 seats available to the members of the general public. They were then brought in. Bradley Rosie and Jennifer Auger from the defense team were not in the courtroom. Richard Allen was. He was standing at the beginning talking with his defense attorney, Andrew Baldwin. The judge came in just after 2 o'clock and asked where Mr. Baldwin, or rather where Mr. Rosie and Jennifer Auger were, and the judge entered at 2:11, according to my notes. And Andrew Baldwin told the judge that they were waiting for Kathy Allen and members of Richard Allen's family to arrive. The judge said, so despite my directive to be less than 10 minutes away, she said the jury has reached a verdict. When can we expect them? Andrew Baldwin replied they were on their way up. They entered the room at about 2:14. At 2:15, the jury, or rather 2:19, the jury entered. You could not tell from the looks on their faces. They did not make eye contact with Richard Allen or either family members of the victims, Abby and Libby, or Richard Allen's family. They came in, they sat down, they looked weary. And again, the room was absolutely quiet. The judge had admonished the crowd not to have any outbursts, that regardless of what the verdict was going to be, there were going to be people who were going to be unhappy with it. She said you can take your unhappiness outside of the courthouse. Again, this jury finding Richard Allen guilty on all 4 counts of murder that he was facing after about 18 hours of deliberations over 4 days, Vinnie.
So at the moment he's found guilty, everyone admonished not to say anything, not to react. What did you notice anything in the courtroom? Anything from a family member to Richard Allen?
Yeah, so his wife and mother, his wife Kathy and his mother Janice began sobbing. The people who were sitting around them hugged them, held them. They were audibly sobbing through most of the proceeding once that verdict was announced. There were members of Abby and Libby's family that were crying. There were others that just remained rather stone-faced as the verdict was read, and that immediate reaction. Once the sentencing date was set, the judge did say that we were free to leave. The law enforcement in the room allowed Richard Allen's family to leave first. After Richard Allen was outside of the court, he was immediately taken into custody. Obviously, he's been in custody, but that will change soon for him. Then the Allen family was allowed to leave, as were members of Abby and Libby's families. Some of their family members stayed to give hugs to members of the prosecution team, to Superintendent Doug Carter of the Indiana State Police and Lieutenant Jerry Holman of the Indiana State Police, as well as the prosecutor Nicholas McClelland, Stacy Diener, James Luttrell. A bit of a celebration in court, although they weren't being very loud with that celebration. I was on the opposite side of the room, but there were a lot of hugs going around, a lot of pats on the back. The prosecution, though, remained somber looking throughout this entire proceeding today. And again, you know, it was just very, very quiet in the courtroom. It was really the first time that I've been in the courtroom with all of these people, and you could hear a pin drop. A lot of reaction outside. I came out of the courthouse. I was one of the pool reporters today, so I did have my sign for the members of the media who were not in. And as people began to see this and realize what the verdict was, there was a lot of cheering, a lot of screaming for Abby and Libby, a lot of clapping. A lot of people are very happy with this verdict. Of course, not everyone is. Richard Allen's family appearing to be quite surprised by this verdict. The judge did also mention that the county, Carroll County, is not able to do that pre-sentencing report for Richard Allen. She had already talked to people from her county who are willing to do that. The defense did waive the 30-day sentencing, which is typical here in Indiana for sentencing to happen in December. Again, it'll be December 20th. They think they only need 1 day for that, and the judge has set aside the entire day. That is a Friday, December 20th. We'll be back here in Indiana to find out just how many years he's facing. Right now, he could be sentenced to 130 years or more. Vinnie?
Barbara, Ted Rowland's with us for our verdict coverage here.
Barbara, did Richard look into the gallery at all to acknowledge his family, either before or after the verdict?
I couldn't see him once the verdict was announced and the judge instructed the members of law enforcement that they could take him out of the room. Everyone stood up. We were still seated, so I was not able to get my eyes on him. Prior to the verdict being read, he had been standing talking with his defense attorney, Andrew Baldwin, and seemed basically the same as he has for every day of this trial. He was rather calm. He had his hands behind his back. He seemed to be chatting with his attorney. His attorneys, though, I think looked far more somber than he did. Once the verdict was read, Jennifer Auger did go back and sit with the Allen family while they were waiting to exit the courtroom. She was holding Kathy Allen, and Kathy Allen was sobbing into her arms. Richard Allen's mother, Janice Allen, also sobbing. She was with her husband. He had his arm wrapped around her. So a lot of visible emotion from them, not a lot of visible emotion from the families of Abby and Libby, other than perhaps a little bit of relief.
Barbara, do we expect anyone to speak afterwards, whether it's the families of the victims, the prosecution team, the defense?
We don't know at the moment. We also don't know whether the gag order is still in effect or how that process is going to play out. I know that there have been quite a few areas set up as potential areas where people could come out and talk if they choose to. One of the areas is to the right of me. I don't see a lot of activity happening there at the moment. And, we just don't know how many of these families are going to want to talk or perhaps take this moment to absorb what just happened before they decide to issue a statement. Kathy Allen's attorney did notify me earlier that after a verdict, she would likely be issuing a written statement. So we will wait for that. The prosecution in this case has not been very keen on doing media interviews. It's unclear if this verdict is going to change that for them or if they're going to keep things rather quiet as they have throughout this process. Superintendent Doug Carter, as I mentioned, is here. He's not in uniform. He was in a suit. He had his wife with him in the courtroom. We don't know if any of them are going to want to come out and have anything to say at this point. 18 hours of deliberations. We really didn't know which way this was going to go, but this jury found Richard Allen guilty of all 4 charges.
Barbara McDonald in Delphi, guilty across the board. Richard Allen has been convicted. 4 counts of murder. Our verdict coverage continues right here on your front row seat to justice.
Everybody says I went to the wrong crowd, but I think I was the wrong crowd.
Nobody in this world loves you like your parents.
And he said to me, wouldn't it be cool if I came with your aunt tonight at the party?
I couldn't get out of my head. I couldn't stop.
Which do you think you are? Sick and treatable or irredeemably mad?
Interview with a Killer. Season finale, Sunday, 8/7 Central. And don't miss the new season coming in 2025, only on Court TV.
Welcome back to our breaking coverage of the Delphi murders case and the verdict today. Richard Allen convicted on all 4 counts. He's been held responsible for the brutal murders of Abby Williams and Libby German. I'm Vinnie Politan. Great to have you with us today. We've got an incredible cast of folks ready to take you through this verdict with reaction in the moments just after. It was less than an hour ago that this all happened. Philip Dubé, you see him next to me. Next to him, my colleague, Ted Rowlands. Then below me, Marie Pereira. There you've got Barbara McDonald. She's in Delphi. And all the way in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, Gray Hughes from Gray Hughes Investigates. All right, I want to get reaction. We'll go around the horn. Philip Dubé, less than 20 seconds.
Lady Liberty is holding her torch high. Today is a day of enlightenment, knowledge, and the beacon of hope, if you will. This jury performed one of the most difficult tasks, and that was to decide the fate of a fellow Hoosier there in Indiana. And they came back unanimously guilty after 18 hours of due consideration. And I have a feeling that this verdict will stick, with the exception of whether or not a higher court would agree with me that they should have had more funding for tool examiner experts to be able to test the firearm and the bullet that was recovered at the scene.
Ted Rowlands.
The end of a long, long road. 8 years it took, and if you go back those 8 years, I know Barbara McDonald was one of the first on this case, but we were all invested in this case from the very beginning. You have these 2 little girls to die in the way that they did, with unanswered questions for years. Who did this? How could they did it? This person's a suspect. Now here we are, and it's all come to an end. And I do believe that they do have the right person, and so does the jury. Justice, I believe, has been served.
Barbara McDonald.
Surprised. I thought the longer it went that this jury could be hung. I thought that, you know, there was definitely enough here for some people to find him guilty, but also enough here for people to find him not guilty or to not be able to decide. So I was a bit surprised that we had a unanimous verdict. Yeah, it's been... I'm happy for the families of Abby and Libby that they can put this part of the story behind them finally.
Gray Hughes.
All I can say is, boom! I mean, look at the Abby and Libby deserve justice in this case, and they would have not got justice if Richard Allen was found not guilty. There would never have been an arrest made in this case. I'm so happy for the family. And I hope they start filing lawsuits against some of these. There's people out there that are making videos against the family members still, that they're the killers in the case, if you can believe that. And now that that's over, they can focus in on getting their lives back to normal. And I think just out of pure sort of, just a good thing to do for humanity, they need to go after these people, because it's just been absolutely horrendous for the families over the years. And I'm so happy that the verdict came out. The truth is known. Richard Allen is the killer. All the evidence pointed to that, and I'm glad they got the right verdict.
Yeah.
So there you go.
From my perspective, it shouldn't have taken so long. Richard Allen is the man that was found guilty. He should have been arrested much earlier, within the first couple months of this. It would have alleviated so much of the suffering of the families. But here we are today, folks. Richard Allen, guilty of all charges.
Play.
Welcome back to our breaking news coverage of the Delphi murders trial. If you're just joining us, it's been a huge day in Delphi, Indiana. Richard Allen, the accused killer, has been convicted on all 4 counts of murder, facing more than 100 years in prison. A big day. It took 18 hours of deliberations for them to reach this verdict, but the jury came back on this Veterans Day. Courthouse was shut down for all business except this trial. The jury was sequestered. They were going nowhere until they delivered a verdict, and they did that about an hour ago, or a little less than an hour ago. The verdict was made public. I'm Vinnie Politan. Great to have you with us this afternoon. I have a great panel of guests who are helping us out today. You'll recognize all of them. We've got Philip Dubé, a great attorney from LA. Ted Rollins, my colleague, my friend. Marie Pereira, amazing attorney and nurse. You've got Barbara McDonald, who's been covering this story literally for years. She's on the ground and was inside the courthouse for this moment. And we've got Gray Hughes from Gray Hughes Investigates, a live streamer on YouTube, who also has been covering this case from day one. What I want to play for everyone is a representative of the Indiana State Police came out in front of the courthouse and spoke just moments ago, because we're trying to get some reaction from the folks connected to the case. Let's take a listen.
So obviously everybody has already got the news of the verdict. With that being said, Judge Gull has not lifted the gag order, so we're not going to be able to make any type of public statement at this point. We'll be looking forward to having something scheduled a month from now following sentencing. So with that, that's all that we're going to be able to say at this time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so the writing's on the wall. If the gag order's in effect, they're not going to speak. They're not going to violate the judge's orders. Why would you do that? Little unusual to have the gag order after the case, because that's usually to protect the jury from any undue influence. But obviously, Judge Fran Gohl would never be influenced by what people are saying outside. She's a judge, so but she has kept the gag order in effect, so no one will be speaking for at least a month on this. But Barbara McDonald was inside the courtroom for the moment. Barbara, how would you describe that moment when everyone's inside the courtroom and we are just about to hear from the jury?
I think there was a collective gasp. You know, one of the things about this judge is she does tend to move very quickly. The minute she received the paper from the foreperson, she immediately began reading the charges, and she read through them very, very quickly. I think it caught a lot of people off guard just how quickly she was going through it, and then what the verdict was, and that there was some finality to this for this stage of the process. I know the defense is very likely to appeal this verdict. There were many issues that they raised that they felt were unfair by this judge heading into trial, and even some of the decisions that she made at trial. So we do anticipate an appeal on at least 1 or 2 issues from this defense team. But, you know, it was a heavy moment, and I think that was on the faces of everyone. Even Superintendent Carter, when he came in, looked somber. The prosecutor looked somber. Everybody was just bracing to hear what this verdict was going to be. After 4 days and 18 hours of deliberations, this has been a very controversial case for so long. The arrest of Richard Allen didn't satisfy that. People have talked about many other people who they believe could have been involved. The defense threw out a couple of names. They were not allowed to use any of that information at trial. But it's going to be very interesting if any of these jurors talk, and to find out what stood out to them, what was the evidence that convinced them that Richard Allen is in fact the killer of Abby and Libby, and what evidence they perhaps discounted along the way as they went through those 18 hours of deliberations.
Ted Rollins, as I think about this moment, and I think about the families of Abby and Libby, what they have gone through the years, and from my perspective, unnecessarily. The man who's been convicted called the tip line right after they released the still image of Bridge Guy. He calls the tip line and says he's there. Yet, for whatever reason, in the highest profile case ever, that for whatever reason is unsolved for 5 years, there's no follow-up. There's no follow-up on the man who said he was there. To this day, I don't understand that. And it was that choice made by whoever, or that mistake made by whoever, that took a case that could have very easily been solved to this mystery that also, I've got to think, struck fear into every parent in Indiana, thinking, will this killer take my kids next?
Right. Oh, well, there was a killer loose in Delphi for 5 years. And it turns out it was Richard Allen, the guy working at the CVS behind the counter. And that, according to the jury in this verdict today. But you're right, it would have changed everything had they followed up, had they interviewed him, because that likely would have triggered more of an investigation, and they could have easily, one would think, have solved the case. The one thing that is really sticking with me, Vinnie, on this one too, is the decision after the Indiana legislature opened up the state for cameras in the courtroom, the decision by this judge to hold this basically not just without cameras, but the arbitrary rules, no computers, no this, no that, even down to the last day where Richard Allen's family wasn't there yet with one of the attorneys, and she scolds them in open court, then grabs the verdict and reads it off. It just, to me, is a disservice, because what you have now is people that were invested in this case from day one for these little girls and in caring for those 2 little girls. They were not able to watch the system. And what's the problem with that? Well, I'll tell you what the problem is, that there's tons of people that right now think that there was a disservice, that Richard Allen was not guilty and he got a horrible trial. He was treated poorly. And guess why? Because they didn't get to see it. And you cannot make an argument to me that would hold water that this was a good choice, because guess who's also paying for it? Greg talked about earlier. The families. There's even hate now going towards these poor families who have endured such a nightmare of 8 years. This should have been opened up for the public, and I think all of us would have had a much better feeling for this case, the evidence, and this verdict.
And it's about trusting our government. Like, the judicial branch is a part of our government. It's the people's government. And if you want to believe in it, and you want to trust it, and you want to understand what's happening, there has to be a sense of transparency. I want to go to Barbara McDonald really quick on this issue of Richard Allen, like a couple days after this, coming forward. What were the circumstances surrounding that, Barbara?
So it was the 15th of February that they released that still image of Bridge Guy. They didn't say where it came from. They just said they have this image. It was the 16th when he didn't call. He went in to the sheriff's department and said, I was out there that day. And they simply wrote down his name and phone number and said, we'll get back to you. And it was a member of the DNR, Dan Doolin, who got back to him and did that initial questioning of him. And in that conversation, he mentioned that he had seen 3 girls out at the trails. And the only thing that was written on the paper for follow-up was to find out who those 3 girls were.
Okay, this is beyond outrageous. Beyond outrageous. Philip Dubé, you've got and the public didn't know the details of this murder scene, but investigators did. They knew they had a naked child, another child wearing the other child's clothing, 2 throats slashed. They knew that from day one. And a man comes down to the sheriff's office and says, I was there, and they take his number. See you?
Well, first of all, I don't know how many leads they got, how many people opened themselves up to the police, but this is a classic example, Vinnie,
take the
has
defense
no...
hat. This is what I need to take the defense hat.
Yes.
Please throw it out the window right now.
Yes.
And just be a concerned citizen worried about a mad killer loose in your neighborhood? Go ahead.
No, of course, it's very upsetting. But if we're honest about it, there really was not enough to say, we need to bring this guy in and arrest him, cuff him, read him his rights, book him, take his mugshot, and let the world see his face. You know, justice doesn't work that way. And sometimes law enforcement.
How about this? How about asking him a couple questions? How about
I agree.
Taking a picture of him and then taking a look at the image you have of the guy on the bridge, who investigators know came from the phone. This was completely botched.
Understood, but it was so premature. You cannot weaponize this situation so prematurely. And as I was going to say earlier,
I'm attacking investigators, Philip. This is what you've done your whole career. And you're not with me on this one.
I am, but this is why murder has no statute of limitations. Justice and law enforcement are like the IRS. They're slow, but they eventually get you. But they have to do it at their own tempo, if you will. And justice prevailed here. As I said earlier, Lady Liberty is passing the torch right now to the family.
He had 5 years to kill more people. That's the problem. He had 5 years to kill more people.
He has to go.
Well, okay. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break. We're going to get reorganized here. Sorry, I'm going to get off of my soapbox. I'm going to calm down. Justice was served today. And Philip Dubé reminded me. Richard Allen, guilty of all charges.
Richard Allen, you child murderer! Why did you do it? Shame on you! Shame on you, Richard!
We've been watching that scene for years. And today, the jury agreed. Richard Allen convicted on all 4 counts inside the courthouse in Delphi, Indiana today. And yes, he will be spending the rest of his life behind bars unless there's some legal maneuvering down the road that gets him out or gets him a new trial. But he's facing 130 years in prison. And my guess is this judge is not going to go lightly on this defendant. Welcome back to our coverage of the Delphi murders verdict. I'm Vinnie Politan. Great to have you with us on this Monday afternoon, Veterans Day. We thank all our veterans for their service to this country and giving us the opportunity to have our system of justice work the way it does. It doesn't without them, so we thank you today. So we've got a great panel of folks with us. Philip Dubé, Ted Rollins, my colleague, Marie Pereira. You see Gray Hughes in the bottom right corner. And now joining us, Bob Mata, great defense attorney, also the host of Defense Diaries on YouTube podcast. He was also out in Delphi and in the courtroom for all of this. Great to see everyone. Bob, since you were inside the courthouse, want to get your take today as you take in the fact of where we are today, that it's over. Richard Allen is convicted. What are your thoughts?
Well, Vinny, you could hear a pin drop quite literally as the jury was brought back in and as they sat and as the verdict slips were handed over to the bailiff and then to the judge. It was incredibly still in that courtroom, and Judge Gull read the verdicts. Everybody maintained decorum in there, and you could hear relief from the victims' families, and you could hear sorrow from Kathy Allen's family. And it was, you know, those kind of moments in life are just very heavy, you know, all around. You feel, I suppose it would be relief from the families, and from the perspective of the Allens, it's a crushing blow. But you have to respect and accept the verdict of the jury. They put the work in. They were in there for just around 17 hours before they rendered their verdict, and they came out and they found him guilty on all counts.
Bob, let me ask you this. Do you, because you've been covering this story, you're a great attorney, do you have any lingering questions in this case?
I do, you know, and I don't want to. That's kind of the problem with this case, is just the way that the procedural posture was handled throughout it. I don't want to have any doubts. And there's going to be appellate issues. I mean, there are certainly going to be appellate issues, and I think that anybody that's been keeping track of this case and following it closely knows that there's going to be appellate issues. At the end of the day, I think, Vinnie, you and I have talked about this, is the weight of those confessions, which I have I'm very inclined to think that that was ultimately the thing that locked it for the jury in terms of coming back with their guilty verdicts. Will those outweigh any other errors that may have been made by Judge Gull during the process, to where those will be found to be harmless error? So, I mean, ultimately it's going to get litigated. Unfortunately for the families, you know, they're going to have to hear about appeals being filed. And, you know, for the Allen family, that's going to be their glimmer of hope, as they still believe that, you know, their husband and brother and son is innocent. So it's not a day of celebrating, you know, it's a day of reflection. It's a day of relief for some, but it's not a day that, you know, people should be cheering and celebrating. It's 2 little girls lost their lives. They will never be brought back, obviously. And in terms of justice, it's the best that we can do, you know.
Yeah, it's all that's left. It's all that's left for the families. You can't get your loved one back, but at least you can turn the page to a certain extent on this whole process. Marie Pereira, any lingering questions that you have relative to this case?
I do, and I want to agree with Bob. You know, I respect the process, and it is a relief for the family, but I still have this scratch of reasonable doubt that I can't reach I have the itch of reasonable doubt, and I can't reach to scratch it. You know why? From day one, putting this whole thing, Judge Gold, under a shroud of secrecy, making it seem like almost like a witch hunt. The way they presumed him guilty before the trial, the way they hounded him, the way they treated him in prison, putting him away, the way they got the confession, his mental status when he made the confession, all of that, the length of time it took them to even prosecute, all of that leaves me feeling uncomfortable. Like Barbara said, like Bob just said, I respect the verdict, but there's a part of me that says that it's a verdict that could have gone either way, because there could have been reasonable doubt. The way they handled the investigation, everything creates a shroud of, I'm not 100% sure they got the right guy, but somebody had to pay for this. It was so heinous what happened to those kids that somebody had to pay, and I feel like the jurors went according to that mode of operating. And I'm not 100% sure they have the right person.
Gray Hughes, let me ask you the same question, because I know you 1,000% agree with this verdict. Are there any lingering questions in what happened to Abby and Libby?
I mean, we don't know exactly how it went, you know, at the crime scene, how, you know, it was amazing how the defense made a big deal about in their, I don't know if you ever saw that Frank's memorandum where they tried to introduce to the public this massive conspiracy using Odinus. They had like 90-something points on how difficult it was to take the arm out of the clothing and move it to, like undressing them and so forth. But the gun did everything. He took the girls down the hill using the gun. He took them across the creek and likely had them undress themselves at gunpoint. And then Abby apparently dressed herself at some point later by using the gun. It's not complicated, but they were trying to make it seem really complex, that there had to be more than one person involved. And I gotta say, I don't see any reasonable doubt on, I mean, there might be like different elements, like you might have a question, the bullet expertise on, you know, what happened there. There are things like, for example, the box cutter element. That element was something that I guess the experts said after Richard Allen confessed that, oh, I thought of a box cutter in the garage. All he really had to say, that part bothers me, he should have said, I never could figure out what created that wound. But then when Richard Allen confessed, I had a whoa moment, and I went and tested it, and the box cutter matches exactly to the wounds, and that would seem reasonable, but people probably thought like, oh, they're just trying to make the evidence match because he said it after the fact, right? So I don't know, I don't have a ton of questions. I think the evidence in this case absolutely has always pointed directly, and even with the lack of some of the techniques that they used and problems, the evidence still overcame that. That's how powerful the timeline was, the confessions, etc. That's why he was found guilty.
Ted Rollins, you know what I find fascinating about this case is that, and Gray pointing this out, what an important piece of evidence the gun is in a case where the victims are not shot. The victims had their throats slashed, yet there was an element of ballistics, and then the gun being used. I mean, that's the only way you could explain how one man could control two victims.
Right, especially with one of those victims actively recording him, because she obviously felt threatened by him and wanted to record him. So I agree that the gun, yeah, is something we don't really look into. There are, I mean, let's face it, right before we found out from Barbara the verdict was guilty, didn't all of us have a little feeling that maybe, what if it's not guilty? I mean, I think once the time period got to like 15 hours or so, I agree with Barbara's like, this might be going to a hung jury, but we didn't get to hear if there were any questions or if they were even read an Allen charge. We don't know. That'll come out later, I'm sure. But there is a bit of weird doubt, and again, I come back to this idea of not allowing the public in all of the way and to see all of this case litigated properly. And to your point, Vinnie, boy, had they gone and interviewed him properly in day one,
of course,
all this is over.
How do you not? I mean, you've got a mad killer on the loose, a man who, if you look at him, similar build to the guy that you have video of as your suspect.
Who said he's there?
So who then says he was there?
Immediately, that gets him onto that grid, right? Onto that picture, onto that people who were there.
I don't understand. It's not, you don't have to be like the FBI. You don't have to be NYPD or LAPD. You can be the Delphi PD or the local sheriff's office and put 2 and 2 together. Brutal murder, man looks like man in video, comes in and says he was there, and we send him away. That's insanity. And the folks in Delphi should be outraged. They should be outraged by this verdict today, because you believe this verdict, you believe that they let a killer run free for 5 years. But no longer. Richard Allen, guilty of all charges. Our verdict coverage continues.
Everybody says I went to the wrong crowd, but I think I was the wrong crowd.
Nobody in this world loves you like your parents.
And he said to me, wouldn't it be cool if I killed my parents and had a party?
I couldn't get out of my head. I couldn't stop.
Which do you think you are? Sick and treatable, or irredeemably mad?
Interview with a Killer. Season finale, Sunday, 8/7 Central. And don't miss the new season coming in 2025, only on Court TV.
Richard Allen, you child murderer! You're going to prison for the rest of your life!
Guilty on all 4 counts, unanimous by this jury.
Welcome back to our coverage of the Delphi murders verdict. Richard Allen guilty on all 4 counts, facing 130 years in prison. He'll be sentenced December 20th. The jury was out about 18 hours before coming back with this verdict. It was a sequestered jury, but today they came back, and yeah, it's unanimous, folks. It has to be. And they spoke, and they spoke very loudly. Richard Allen, now a convicted child killer. Convicted child killer. He's been in custody for years now and will remain in custody for the rest of his life unless he's able to partake in some legal maneuvering that either gets him a new trial or gets him exonerated. We don't expect that. This wasn't a DNA case. It wasn't a DNA case. Welcome back to our coverage. We have a great panel of guests who are helping us work through all of this today, led by, of course, Ted Rowlands, my colleague here in studio with me at the mothership. Ted, and you got Philip Dubé there, you got Marie Pereira, Bob Mata, Defense Diaries, and Gray Hughes as well, all back. Here's the question I want to pose to everyone, okay? This is a horrific crime. This was a sex crime. I mean, one of the girls is naked. Whether he actually committed the sex crime or attempted the sex crime, if you're taking clothes off of an underage girl, it's a sex crime, period, right? There's something wrong with you. Could this be the only crime he has ever committed? Ted, I'll begin with you. This is a guy who has no record, right?
Yeah, no online print of looking at child pornography, no, yeah, you'd think how sex crimes, especially when you talk about pedophiles, typically you have, you get into it some other way than just pulling out a gun and then pulling this off on a bridge randomly. Was he out looking for it? Was this a crime of opportunity? Was this always in the back of his mind? He just never acted on it? The why here is a major question. What was the motivation of this guy who had a family, was working at the local CV, was a part of this community, and would know the devastation that he would be imparting by committing a crime of this nature, and then having the ability to just blend right back in for 5 long years.
And presumably not commit another crime.
Not go online, not do, yeah, exactly.
Marie Pereira, your thoughts on this issue, because to me, it's different than many of the defendants we see in these positions. Not different, though, than perhaps the Idaho student's accused killer. Same boat with him, despite, well, he did have some strange behavior. But in this case, there's no real history of this guy.
No real history and no real motive except for violence. And it just makes no sense to me. Motive is not mandatory in proving a prosecution's case, but us as jurors and people, we like to know why. Why did you do this? With, like Ted said, no history of violence. It never happened again. It just makes no sense. And you put that on top of the fact that Gagum Gold kept us out of the courtroom, and we still have, like I said, that itch from the reasonable doubt because we didn't see the entire thing.
I'm sending you a back scratcher. Gray Hughes, why don't you send her a Gray Hughes investigates back scratcher so she can get rid of that reasonable doubt? Gray,
It's always going to be there.
Gray, let me ask you, in all your investigations through the years, was this guy ever on the radar before he was arrested? Did anyone ever talk about him, number one? And number two, is there anything about his history that would link him to something like this?
No, he was actually never on the radar, but he obviously, like you guys were saying earlier, he should have been. I mean, I feel the same sort of anger you do with the Dan Doolin situation. I think it's more communication, though. Like, why didn't they say, hey, listen, if anybody gets a hold of the tip line, tomorrow after we put that picture out, show them a picture and say, "Is this you?" And that would have ended the case like in 2 seconds. It would have been over. But I haven't seen any indication at all. I actually think that. Hold on a second. I'm not sure why there's a call coming in, but I haven't seen any indications at all that he had done anything in the past, and I think this is like his first time that he did this. I think he said he was a sex addict, though, for sure. Sorry,
I think that's someone who's going to sell you some back scratchers to send to Marie. I think that's who's calling you right now.
I was using the phone.
There we go. Let me go to Bob Mata. Bob, that's the other strange thing about this, for this particular defendant, the background, the history. We know with a lot of sex offenders, they start out with behavior that's not quite as aggressive, then it gets worse through the years. But this was straight to some attempt at a sex offense and a murder, double murder.
Yeah, it is strange. Typically, like you said, they work up to it. This went 0 to attempted sexual assault, double homicide without any in between, as there's no evidence of anything in his past from his digital footprint or anything else. He's been married 30 plus years. And I could tell you definitively, as I sat next to Kathy Allen every day, she's stunned. She's sitting there, she doesn't believe that her husband did this. And, when you kind of look at the size of this town, when you kind of ask that question, well, could he have been creeping around doing stuff like this prior to, we're talking about a very small town in rural Indiana. If there was a series of sexual assaults that had gone on that were unsolved, those things just don't exist. And, he wasn't leaving town for long periods of time. It's just, he was here, you know what I mean? So, every indication would be that this was the first time, which
wow.
is really hard to digest in terms of kind of building up to that. So it's a head scratcher, Vinnie.
Yeah, but not a back scratcher, apparently. Philip Dubé, let me go to you. Philip Dubé, you probably know better than all of us, with all the great years of work you've done defending people. Are you shocked by this apparent lack of history of this defendant?
Not at all, frankly. This was clearly, for me, a crime of opportunity. I just have a feeling that when he got out on that bridge, that maybe one of the girls just kind of gave him an odd look, a dirty look, and he used that as an opportunity to exploit and to humiliate them. I do not believe for 1 minute that this was sexually motivated, Vinnie. And I'll tell you why. This was mid-February, approximately mid-40s degrees. I find it really unbelievable, incredible, that anybody could be sexually aroused in that type of climate and that type of temperature in the great outdoors. So I truly believe that this was some type of exploitative, humiliating act to get these girls for whatever reason. It could be rooted in something as simple as giving him a dirty look while crossing that bridge, and it just flipped a switch in him. He took advantage of the situation, pulled the gun out, ordered them to cross that bridge, get to that creek area, and did what he did, and happened to have the box cutter from CVS.
Gotcha. All right.
Why would he want him to be naked then? If there was no sexual component.
I think he was trying to...
You got to hold it right there, Phil. I'm out of time.
Okay.
You know the people in the ear control everything. Bob Mata, thank you so much. When we come back, more of our breaking coverage. Richard Allen, guilty of all charges. Big breaking news on this holiday Monday. All courts across the nation closed except in Delphi, Indiana, open for just one case, the Delphi murders. And today, the sequestered jury, after 18 hours of deliberations, returned guilty verdicts. 4 guilty verdicts against Richard Allen, all charges now facing up to 130 years in prison. He'll be sentenced on December 20th. So this is a story, a case that we have been covering for years, even here on Court TV. Since we relaunched this network, this story's been front and center. One of the things that always confused me about this case were the disjointed clues that came out through the years. We know about the video of the bridge guy, but then there were 2 different sketches that were released, and I want to take a moment to take a look at those and understand the significance of these sketches and try to understand. 2 sketches of one person that look, from my perspective, nothing alike. The one on the left, released first, but made second. 3 weeks after all of this, Susan Carbaugh comes forward and describes this man, Sarah Carbaugh, and from my perspective, looks a little bit like the bridge guy, very consistent with the bridge guy. But Betsy Blair, who gave the first description, helped in making the sketch on the right, which looks much younger than the sketch on the left, and from my perspective, much younger than the man on the left, Richard Allen, the defendant, the convicted killer in this case. And I could never reconcile the 2 sketches, one with a hat, one without a hat, one with facial hair, one without facial hair. One looks like the bridge guy, the other looks like Justin Timberlake. I never understood this. Let me bring back in my great panel of guests. Maybe they can help me understand this in light of today's verdict. Philip Dubé is with us, Ted Rowlands with us, Marie Pereira, Bob Mata, and Gray Hughes. I will start with Bob Mata. Bob, these 2 sketches to me couldn't be less alike. Did you see similarities? Did you think we were looking for one person, 2 people? What's your take on why these were the 2 sketches that were released?
It's always been a mystery. I mean, you have eyeballs, right, Vinnie? I mean, clearly those are not the same person. So it's always been one of the things that I think is that probably the impetus of that itch in the middle of Marie's back that has been just one of the befuddling parts of this case where, you know, you've got law enforcement saying, forget about the first sketch. This is the guy that we think is bridge guy. And then after that, they say, well, we actually think they're the same person.
Let me ask you this, Bob. Because, just so we don't run out of time, I want you to answer this question. 2 different witnesses. How would you compare, because you saw the trial, we didn't, Sarah Carbaugh versus Betsy Blair in the way they testified?
Completely different people. I mean, there was no other way to take it. I mean, Betsy Blair was definitive that this was a youthful person with poofy hair. It just was a completely different description, and she was very credible. In terms of credibility, when I was weighing the credibility of Betsy Blair as compared to Sarah Carbaugh, it was night and day. Betsy Blair was very credible, and she was very just adamant about what the person looked like. And again, I mean, it's one of those things in the courtroom, we never had an in-court identification. Like, we never had one of those witnesses say, yeah, that's the guy I saw. So it's just one of those things that's always going to kind of haunt me in this case. But that's true with many cases, you know, when it's a circumstantial case. There's always going to be those lingering questions. But, I mean, again, you know, the jury did their work. They deliberated for 17 hours, maybe 18 hours, and they came back with a verdict. You have to accept it. They did the work.
Ted, what's your thought on the sketches?
Totally different, and Bob's description of the witnesses, it makes it even more frustrating. And you did have the one suspect that had contacted one of the girls online, pretended to be this Anthony Schatz character, who was after little girls, was a pedophile, is now serving time for that. He seems, he obviously was not ever charged in this case for the murder, but it's a head scratcher. How could that be so different?
Let me ask you, Gray Hughes, we only have like 30 seconds here, but from your perspective, the sketches.
Yeah, I mean, the sketches look different. I always thought the bridge guy would look like the first sketch released. However, check this thing out. A lot of people don't realize this. Betsy Blair said she was 50 feet away from platform 1, but she turned around at the barricade. Well, when you measure it, it's 111 feet, 37 yards away. So her really amazing description seems less likely at that point. See, they didn't bring that up at trial, but I actually went out and measured it. It's 37 yards, not 50 feet, that she said. So I think that's the reason why she had a description, poofy hair. There was a brown covering on the head, and maybe that's just what her memory remembered. And a lot of people don't remember. Eyewitness accounts are quite varying if you do it.
Oh, yeah.
So you know how that works.
Yeah, like if I asked you what color my tie is today, you may not remember.
No idea.
But it is a verdict day, so it's red. All right, Bob Motta, I know you got to go. Thank you so much. Everyone else coming, staying with us as our coverage of the Richard Allen guilty verdict continues.
Everybody is talking about Court TV's new hit series, Interview with a Killer.
Isn't there a part of you that just wants to talk truthfully about what actually happened?
Find out what viewers and critics are talking about.
Why would somebody do that?
Catch up on this must-see series on Court TV's YouTube channel.
Why are you here talking to us?
And watch a new episode this Sunday at 8 on Court TV.
I think what is important is talking about who they were while they were living, and that's what's most important to me. I really want to make sure that people know that they were good people. True justice would be that there would be no need for justice at all, that it never would have happened, that they never would have been taken from us, that they never would have been treated in that way.
Absolutely heartbreaking what happened to Abby and Libby. And it always comes back to this image I have in my mind, two young girls, right? No school today, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? Well, it's a little warm outside. Why don't we go outside? It's beautiful. That's what every parent, trust me, every parent wants their child to do. Get away from the video games, get away from social media, go outside, enjoy life. That's what they want to do. And that's when a monster took their lives. And that monster is Richard Allen. The jury spoke today, guilty of all 4 charges, 2 counts of murder for each child that was killed that day. Welcome back to our verdict coverage here on this Monday. Want to reintroduce our panel that is with us. Philip Dubé, Ted Rowlands on the top row. Bottom left, Marie Pereira. Bottom right, Gray Hughes. Gray Hughes Investigates. And joining us now, investigative journalist and author of the book Down the Hill, Susan Hendricks. Susan, so grateful that you could join us today. Where were you when this verdict came down today?
Well, Vinnie, about 5 days ago, I happened to meet in Lafayette, about 20 minutes from Delphi, a girl named Lexi. She was best friends with Libby in school. And I met her, we got talking. She's a wonderful person. And she said, are you going down to the court? I said, yes. So I would drive her down here, and I felt like I've known her for a long time. Well, today, we were here. We weren't sure. You know, as time goes on, you think, is this going to be a locked jury, or they're going to be able to make a decision? She said, have you been to Libby's grave? I said, no. And she drove me there. It's about 5 minutes away. And I had a bracelet on that said, today is the day that the family had given me. And I kind of hung it on a hook there. It's this gravesite with her picture on it with Libby's face and kind of what she likes to do. I know that Kelsey would drop off McDonald's sweet tea and French fries there. So we were there. All of a sudden I get on my phone, verdict. And I go, oh my gosh, we flew here. I mean, it was me and Lexi, who, by the way, is a 2-year-old son. You realize how old Libby would be. She's 21 years old. And we ran back here and we heard. And that's where I was. And outside of the courtroom, you felt it was nerve-wracking, to say the least, Vinnie. You know, you could guess all you want, but you never know. And it's been so long, more than 7 years, for this day to happen.
And any word from any of the family members today, Susan? I know you've spent so much time with them.
Well, I just texted, thinking of you, and, you know, I waved to them when they were leaving court, but I did see with Lexi, before we went to see Libby's grave, I was at a restaurant around here to get a bite to eat with Lexi, and I saw Libby's aunt in her car. It's a drive-through too, so I walked over and I grabbed her hand. She looked depleted, drained of every piece of energy you could imagine, with tears in her eyes. At that point, no one knew. But just the process, Vinnie, the wait for those families. And as you know, it doesn't bring the girls back. To me, this is not a win. It's a Band-Aid. It's maybe a sigh of relief, I guess I would put it, rather than a win. The girls never come back.
Absolutely. Now, I only have a minute left here, so I'm going to go around the horn, and I want you to think for a moment of just one word to describe what transpired today. Just one word. Philip Dubé.
Finality.
Relief.
Marie?
It's just tragic. That's what it is. It's tragic. It's unexplainable, unacceptable, just wrong.
Susan Hendricks.
Surreal, with all the media around here and the family, friends, and teachers. It's a mix of everyone. Surreal.
Gray Hughes.
Justice.
I want to thank all of you for joining us today and sharing in this moment. I really appreciate all of you, especially Ted Rowlands, my colleague, who's working overtime, came back today to help us through all of this. Thank you so much, Philip Dubé, Marie Pereira, Susan Hendricks, and Gray Hughes. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for watching again. Justice served today. Richard Allen guilty of all charges.